Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome at the Prague European Summit, day number 2. My name is Aneta Zachová and I'm editor-in-chief of Euractiv Czech Republic, and I'm happy that I can moderate the second day of the Prague European Summit as well as I did it yesterday. Yesterday we had a full afternoon of discussions. We were talking about geoeconomics of the EU and impacts of the war in Ukraine. We were talking about the Fit for 55 package. We were also discussing EU single market, and at the end we had nice discussion on the green and digital transformation of the European Union, and we also witnessed a very nice ceremony where the prize Vision for Europe was awarded to a former Czech foreign minister Karel Schwarzenberg. Today we have also a lot of interesting discussions on various topics. Of course, the main motto is again the green and digital transformation, and whether the European Union and Europe as a whole can lead actually this digital and green transformation. And before we start the discussions, I would like to welcome here on the floor again performers, musicians from the music and dance faculty of Academy of Performing Arts in Prague. So please welcome here, and we are thrilled to hear another musical performance. Thank you very much for this very interesting performance. We could hear very unique instruments and also see unique ways how to use traditional instruments. So I would like to thank a lot to the Academy of Performing Arts for this nice show that actually begin our new day of the Prague European Summit. Let me only remind you the partners and organizers of this wonderful event. This Prague European Summit is organized by two leading institutes that are focusing on European policies and international relations. It means the Institute of International Relations in Prague and the European Institute for European Policy. Let me also mention institutional partners who are super important to organize such a nice, huge event. This year's summit is co-organized with the government of the Czech Republic, so with the Office of the Government of the Czech Republic. And thanks to the Office of the Government, we can have the event in this beautiful Liechtenstein Palace. This event is also a signed event of the Czech EU presidency, which is taking place in the second half of 2022. And this event is also supported by the representation of the European Commission in the Czech Republic, the European Investment Bank, Hans Seidel Stiftung, City of Prague. And when it comes to main partners of this event, the leading partner is Stratos Auto, who has been active on the Czech market for more than 28 years, and it's one of our most important partners, and EIT Urban Mobility, which is an initiative of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, a body of the European Union that aims to accelerate the transition to sustainable urban mobility and livable cities. And when it comes to general media partner, I have to notice or mention that the general media partner is the Czech television, so the Czech public service broadcaster, and among other media partners I can mention EU Observer, Radio Free Europe, and Hospodářské noviny. So these are the partners thanks to whom we could organize the Prague European Summit. And as I mentioned before, today we have full day of discussions. We will discuss about, for example, the new EU industrial strategy. We will talk about Belarus. We will talk about repowering EU after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. We will discuss recovery and resilience plans. There are really many topics to discuss. Part of the program is taking place here in the Golden Hall of the Liechtenstein Palace, and other closed roundtable discussions will be held downstairs and in other rooms of this beautiful Liechtenstein Palace. So I'm looking forward for all the discussions, and let me now start today's program with introducing you a very important person from the Czech public sphere. This person is Věra Jourová, the European Commission Vice President for Values and Transparency. Unfortunately, Ms. Jourová couldn't join us here in person, but she prepared for us a nice video message. Let me only remind you that Ms. Jourová, it's her second term in the European Commission, and before she started her career in Brussels, she served as the Minister of Regional Development here in the Czech Republic. So I would like to now ask the organizers to allow us to hear a video speech of Ms. Věra Jourová.
Dear participants, allow me to greet the Prague European Summit from a distance. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine has fundamentally changed the geopolitical landscape in Europe. And its many fallouts are felt well beyond Europe. For instance, higher commodity and energy prices, as well as uncertainty in supply chains, are further worsening the crisis of the global markets. Energy prices and supply shortages put pressure on our economy and threaten the energy security in the EU and our neighborhood. This is the other war that President Putin is waging, his war on energy. This is why, based on the direction set by EU leaders, the Commission has put forward measures to address the energy crisis, covering supply, demand, as well as price volatility. They are based on solidarity between neighbors, and there is also support to member states to accelerate the deployment of renewable energies. In the end, it will be our solidarity with Ukraine and with one another, our resilience rooted in our hope of a common vision for the future, that will defeat violence and fear and thwart territorial ambitions. Since the start of the war, our priority has been to respond to emergency needs in Ukraine, Moldova, and beyond. So far, the EU and its member states have mobilized over 19 billion euro of support for Ukraine, and we will continue to stand with them. Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia have been given a European perspective by the European Council. Ukraine and Moldova were also granted candidate country status, and Albania and North Macedonia formally opened accession negotiations with the EU in July. The Commission has also recently recommended granting candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina. These are important political milestones for the future of the EU. The perspective of EU membership is a strong anchor, not only for prosperity, but also for peace and security, and concrete support measures have been activated. We are working on an energy rescue package for the entire Western Balkans. We plan to offer 1 billion euro in EU grants, which should lead to investments of 2.5 billion euro. With the Repower EU plan, the EU will keep working to phase out Russian energy imports while accelerating a green and just energy transition. This includes our closest neighbors, the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, who were invited to work together on the voluntary common purchase of gas, LNG, and hydrogen. The faster we move away from fossil fuels, the more secure our energy is, the more competitive we will become, and we will also have a cleaner environment which benefits our health. Renewables are our best shot to build a sovereign and sustainable energy made in Europe. Together with good governance and overall socio-economic stability, democracy and the rule of law are the fundamentals of the enlargement process. It is progress made on the fundamentals that determines the overall pace of negotiations. This is not an abstract or formalistic approach. It simply reflects the fact that without those values being respected, nothing else works. The rule of law, democracy, and fundamental rights are the foundations on which the European Union is based and an essential part of our identity. They are what distinguish us from other forms of government, such as Putin's criminal regime. We cannot compromise on these values, and this is why we work closely with the enlargement countries to address shortcomings, for the sake of their citizens and our own. In all these areas, genuine political will is essential. We are fully committed to supporting our partners who are ready to engage in profound and meaningful reforms. Accountable governments and democratic institutions are crucial, not only for the EU accession process, but also to ensure long-lasting change, including when it comes to the green transition. This is why the EU will continue to support our partners all the way. Thank you for your attention.
I would like to thank Ms. Jourova for her video message and for her very strong statement related to the war in Ukraine and also the need for the green and digital transformation that is happening right now in Europe. I am also glad that we have the second keynote address speaker. I'm very happy that we can welcome here in Prague Mr. Nasser Nureddini, Minister of Environment and Physical Planning of North Macedonia. I can say that Mr. Nureddini, before he joined the government, worked as an analyst and also as investment manager. So he was dealing with the green economy and green investments in practice. So I think that his insights and his expertise will be also great for us to hear his experience and his thoughts about the green economy and about the future of Europe. So I would like to ask Mr. Nureddini to join me here on the stage and to present us his keynote address. Please.
Excuse me. Good morning to everybody. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. Thank you for inviting me to the European Prague Summit. I will try and keep my keynote speech a bit shorter. I know it's early in the morning. You probably don't want to hear the usual speeches that we get on these events. I actually just came back from COP27 in Egypt. Well, actually in Sharm el-Sheikh, to put it more open, which is called the charming Sharm, which is a lot warmer than it's here. And we're doing the annual speeches there. We have the annual promises. I've done this for the third time now in my career. I've been a Minister of Environment of North Macedonia for the last three years and a few months. And sadly, I have to say, we get to hear the same speeches often over and over again. The time is now, it is late, we should have done it, we should be somewhere else. Unfortunately, and we also hear comments from people speaking about the mistakes done in the past, that it's not our fault, the legislation in the past wasn't right, the legislation isn't right today, and it's difficult to change. And we are the ministers today, or we are the legislation, the people proposing the changes. The reality is, if we don't make the changes today, if we don't just say this is the status quo, then we will continue pushing the ball to the next generation, to a lot of young people that are here today. So that means this is the status quo. We either act, or the next generation of politicians will say the same thing. It is now. We will hear the Director General, Guterres, saying, well, the way to hell. I think that was his words that he used in COP. I think we're already there. In the 70s, everybody was speaking about the climate change. That's 50 years ago. Today, we're still speaking about greening the economy. We are still thinking about how we're going to go renewable, carbon neutral, and how we're going to achieve that to create a better future for our children. The reality is that train has already left. We used to speak about mitigation in between. Today, we're speaking about adaptation. Because we finally realize that things have changed, we need to adapt. We need to adapt to forest fires. We need to adapt to flash floods. Surprisingly, I'm going to tell you something which is shocking. A week ago, we had forest fires in North Macedonia in November. It was 25 degrees. So it is pure adaptation. So the key challenges we're all facing is, first of all, we had the pandemic a few years ago, and still ongoing, unfortunately. I think we learned a few lessons out of that. We learned that we're too dependent on certain sources. Our supply chains are very long. We were relying on food, products from across the world. We realized that the transport wasn't working anymore. We had actually food scarcities in some European countries even, in mine, for example. where we actually have got support from our neighbors. Then, unfortunately, we have the horrible war in Ukraine. The loss of life, to start off with, is the worst thing ever. Then the effects that's having on all the countries in Europe is on a multitude that we never expected. And sadly, I think from the pandemic, we didn't learn much, apart from maybe, supposedly, we hear some speeches that in the European Union, decisions are made quicker now, which is good. But we all knew that we were really dependent on Russian gas. We as a country, we're 100% dependent on Russian gas. Unfortunately, we only have one interconnector with our neighbor, Bulgaria. Recently, we changed the agreement where we can actually import non-Russian gas as well, which wasn't possible before. We're investing in an interconnector with Greece, which will give us a different source. However, though, the key is that I know we're speaking about Repower EU, Repower Europe. Reality is 40% of the gas that we currently source is Russian. That's 150 billion cubic meters, plus minus or more a year. We're all speaking about new gas pipelines. These take time, and this will take a lot of time. All of us are relying on Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan currently has only a 10 billion cubic meter gas pipeline to Europe. They're going to build another one, which is another 10 billion. So we need to actually try and move forward as soon as possible when it comes to renewable energy. However, though, one challenge we faced, for example, as a country is we're investing in renewable energy. However, though, it's not constant. Something we don't actually all speak, or not many of us speak about. It's not a constant, unfortunately. It depends on the season, depends on the time of the day. Solar is great. We're all investing in it. But we need a balancing act. We need something to balance it. We need a storage facility. So when it comes to the Western Balkan countries, and I hope my dear neighbors don't mind me speaking in their name, we are investing in solar, we are investing in wind power, but the key is we need to invest either in large hydropower plants, which are going to balance the grid, or we need to look for a storage facility. That is hydrogen, green hydrogen. It's expensive though, because we as a country, we're being very ambitious. Our enhanced NDC to the Paris Agreement has a very ambitious, better said, of decreasing our greenhouse gas emissions by 51%, which is not 55, as the EU is aiming for, but we're aiming for 51. And that is very ambitious for us. It's the highest target anywhere in the Western Balkans. And we're actually very optimistic that we're going to achieve that. We have got a strategy in place and we will. However, we shouldn't be measured, and I think certain countries in Central Europe, who used to be part of the Eastern Bloc, understand that we cannot be measured to the standards of Western European countries. We, unfortunately, used to be under communist or semi-communist rule. Our industry did not develop the way the Western European countries did. So we're a few decades behind. The Western European countries have been industrialized for over 100 years. Well, I've been in the process of that. We're literally doing it now. And the Western Balkans, in the meantime, unfortunately, we had wars. So we know how it feels like and what is going on in Ukraine. So what we're saying is, it's not just about the money, but it's about the technology. What we're asking for, actually, what I would like to appeal to, is we need the support and the access to the technology to be able to fulfill our ambitions of the green transition. And that is only going to happen if Europe supports also the developing countries and the candidate countries from the Western Balkan 6 and anyone else. Because trust me, we've tried for the last 17 years to become an EU member. And only this year, July, did we get the date to actually start the accession talks. So we are on the path. We are on the right way. We're all in it together. It was mentioned yesterday. I think Europe only produces approximately between 7 to 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions globally. But the ramifications, not just in my country or our region, which is very prone to the freak weather events, we need to be thinking about the other parts of the world. Africa, where desertification is happening every day. It's obliging people to move. However, though, the opportunities are great to invest and create not only regional, but create new partners for energy sources across the world in our regions. And I'm happy that Mr. Bushel is here from the energy community, who's supporting us to try and create little micro, regional, when I say micro, I'm speaking about the Western Balkans, energy strategies that will make it sustainable for the future and won't let such events, and hopefully there are no such events in the future, but they won't let such events in the future impact us as dearly as it is impacting us now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you much, Mr. Minister, for this great speech and also for sharing with us your fresh experience from the COP27 conference, which is taking place in Egypt. It's time to start and to continue on and elaborate a bit more on what has been said during the keynote addresses. It's time to start the first discussion of today's program of the Prague European Summit. I would like to welcome here my colleague moderator, Mr. Richard Jozwiak, who is Europe editor in Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, to join me here on the floor. And in the next couple of minutes, we will, and I will also would like to ask the speakers of the first panel to take their seats. And in next minutes, we will discuss about the green geoeconomics and the European neighborhood. Maybe you remember the first panel of the yesterday's program, where we were actually discussing the EU geoeconomics and impacts of the war in Ukraine on the, let's say, role of the European Union in geoeconomic, let's say, world and in this field. So we will go much deeper and we will focus on the European neighborhood. Let me also remind you that you can join the discussion via application Slido. You can find us under the hashtag PES 2022. You can see the hashtag here on the screen, and you can also find the instructions in the materials you got at the entrance. So I would like to now ask my colleague moderator, Mr. Jozwiak, to take the floor and start the first discussion of our today's program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suppose the mic's working, yeah. So yes, I'm Richard Jozwiak. I'm the editor of Radio Free Europe, and we will continue right now on a topic of green geoeconomics and the European neighborhood. And I think essentially there is 3-4 questions we'll try to address to here. First one is the obvious one. How are we going to get rid of Russian hydrocarbons and our addiction to it? Secondly, how are we doing this with still being so ambitious on our green transition? Because the EU is not giving up on its green transition, neither is the Western Balkans. Thirdly, how do we, and this is something that Mr. Noureddini has already talked about, how do we do this while bringing in our neighborhood, Western Balkans, Eastern Partnership countries, but also North Africa? But then maybe also another thing that it's worth considering as well, how do we do this without making it an exploitative relationship, a neo-colonial relationship where the EU basically just grabs resources and there's no added value to it? So with me, I have to my right, Mr. Noureddini. He has already made a brilliant speech here. He needs no further introduction. Minister of Environment and Fiscal Planning in North Macedonia. We have Vesela Cherneva, the head of the ECFR office in Sofia, also deputy director ECFR. For us journalists, she's known as a fantastic spokesperson, used to be at the Bulgarian MFA. Finally, nice to see you in person and not only on the phone. And then probably one of the, well, I think the best energy expert in Europe on these sort of issues, Dirk Buschle. I'm not putting pressure on you, Dirk. Obviously known as the chairholder of the European Energy Policy Chair at the College of Europe, my alma mater. So nice to see an old professor back again. Vesela, I might actually start with you. Ladies first.
Sure.
And maybe even a bit on Bulgaria, because Bulgaria has always been seen as a very vulnerable country when it comes to Russian energy. We've seen it many times before, this energy blackmailing. And it's a feeling that if Bulgaria can manage it, so perhaps can the EU. So will we manage without Russian hydrocarbons, especially this winter?
I hope so. End of April, Bulgaria was, together with Poland, the first, they were the first two European countries to which Gazprom cut off the gas. And this was at the same time a surprise, but also in a way it was expected, because it is quite clear that Russia is using gas as a weapon. The weaponization of energy has really brought about an awakening. And if I can also quote your initial question, how much is geopolitics part of the energy calculation of Europe? I think this is, it is this spring that Europe really realized to the full extent how much this is the case. But coming back to Bulgaria, I think there are now very few people who have any illusions about the real goals of Kremlin and Gazprom with this. The maybe good part of the story is that gas is only 16% of the Bulgarian energy mix. So in a way, it was a shock, but it was, and it was a systemic shock clearly, but it was not, let's say, detrimental to the overall economy. In the meantime, like all the others, we have been looking for other sources. Maybe the biggest change since April is the opening of the interconnector with Greece. This is a project that has been in the works for 12 years. I mean, this is quite a remarkable, again, victory of Gazprom, if I may put it this way, to make such a short pipeline be, you know, worked on for such a long time, not without the help of the Bulgarian governments, of successive Bulgarian governments. And so where we are now, we have a couple of alternatives, but like everybody else in Europe, we know that even if this winter works out okay, next winter is probably going to be even more difficult. And I think this is the calculation we all have to make. What is the price that we're ready to pay to Russia in order to stay independent? I think the political decision is taken. There is no way that any government in Europe is going to go back to Russia energy dependency. The minister has spoken about renewables. I think the big potential, and this was also mentioned at the panel last night, is in decreasing consumption. This is a big open field in the Balkans, not only the Western Balkans, I think elsewhere as well. We have a lot of energy to save. A lot of the energy is going actually in a very uneconomical way in the air. So that can be worked on. And last, if you allow me, this whole idea of regional cooperation should really become a reality much more than it was until now. We have, for instance, pipelines that are empty right now because the Russian gas is no more. Those pipelines could, and they go north-south, those pipelines could be actually reversed. And if we are smart enough to use the gas coming from Middle East and North Africa, and LNG gas, but that also concerns oil, I think we can use that infrastructure and even be helpful to countries like Ukraine, like Moldova, and so on and so forth. This is a matter of a wider European planning and common purchasing. We're actually in Brussels, they're talking about it today. So I think it's really high time for that. Thanks.
Mr. Pushler, turning to you, please save us now. Like, how are we gonna solve this? We hear maybe this winter is all right, but Mr. Chernova is talking about next winter will be difficult. We're talking with Mr. Noureddin is talking about interconnection, about money to spend for technology for places in Western Balkans, for example, lower consumption. Yes. So please complete the puzzle for us. What do we need to do?
Well, thanks a lot. I'm a bit afraid that I don't have the saving formula or maybe not even concrete pieces for how we'll be getting through this winter. As has been said, it looks like Europe has been taking this crisis seriously, has been responding to the crisis very quickly. And I do actually share this expectation and hope that with the measures that have been taken, and this is evidently a consequence to a shock that we felt, which has a lot to do with a self-created dependence, with a self-created reliance on not only one source of gas, but one fuel as well. But given the circumstances and given all the omissions of the past, I think we have taken the appropriate measures now for this winter. What is important is, and not only for the next winter, how we continue. And that is something I believe that you have put very well in your introduction, in the minister's speech, and also in the topic of this panel. It's about, you call it geoeconomics, so I think the term geopolitics is more common. And that has a lot to do with how Europe will position itself in its neighborhood, but also beyond, in order to avoid crises like the present one. The original concept of geopolitics comes from an academic back in the 19th century, Rudolf Kjellén, a Swede, who stated the obvious, that we're all dependent on geography and climate, and that it is important, essential for a state to have access to resources. And in today's world, we have seen how this can be interpreted wrongly, in the sense that we turn this need to access into dependencies, but also that in tomorrow's world, that's not going to change. We do have, of course, wind, we do have solar, they are ubiquitous, but they need land, they need other preconditions, so they will always, energy resources will always be scarce. And even more than in the recent past, in the further past, we have also interpreted these messages wrong. The first revolution, industrial revolution, essentially was one that relied on slavery. The second one relied on colonialism. So we have to, in the relation with the countries on which Europe will always be dependent, we'll have to change that formula for sure. And this is evidently under the impression of today's war. We feel something that has been only discussed in academic circles so far, the weaponization of energy, that energy is not a commodity. That's, for instance, the German approach, Wandel durch Handel, so change through trade. It's not as simple as that, and it has turned out to be a little bit, not only a little bit naive, especially vis-à-vis the Putin regime. But will we ever achieve a situation where we'll be independent of foreign providers, foreign suppliers of energy? I don't think so. I think we have to recognize that a strive for autarky is not possible, and if it were possible, it would come at a very high cost. So we have to find smarter ways on how to use the combination of resources, use globalization also to make sure that not only we will have the energy we need, but also that Europe is not vulnerable and is not getting back into the old dependence pattern. And this is a discussion that, of course, is also being had also on political levels. The French, by majority, introduced the concept of strategic autonomy. It's not something that is loved all over Europe. It's also not something that's very clear, to be honest. I would interpret it as opposed to being independent, which is, in my view, is just a chimera. It's just not being achievable. As opposed to energy or resource independence, this would mean to be able to act and to keep the autonomy to act and not only to react as we see now. And we do see, as we are observing and participating in European energy and climate policy, we do these things happening. We do see joint gas purchases, which is something that was unthinkable only a few months ago. We see a new industrial policy, I think you'll be talking about that, emerging, where also Europe tries to better coordinate its approaches towards hydrogen, its approaches towards batteries, towards rare earths, etc. So these are elements. But in the end, what strategic autonomy really requires, and that brings me to our neighborhood, is smart alliances, not alliances that are one-way streets, so not alliances where Europe tries to get access to natural resources by exploiting or by using the neighbors as resource-rich countries. There may, of course, be and should be exchange, but in the end, and to achieve our common goal, especially in the face of Europe's relative meaninglessness on a global scale, we need to build smarter alliances. And I think this depends a lot on good governance. We see ideas floating. We have a European political community now, but without really governance elements yet. We have the accession instrument, which is not going as it should be going, because it is not yielding results, and we see that rightly so. On the side of the Western Balkans, for instance, the whole formula is something that needs to be rethought and needs to, first of all, yield results and not just talks. And my hope is that Ukraine defending our values and liberties, having been admitted to this club of accession talks, will have enough weight, also moral weight, to speed that up. But in the absence of full accession, we do need, and that would be my last comment, we do need communities. I'm not only an academic, but also working for the energy community, where North Macedonia is a leading member, and we are cooperating with Minister Noureddini also on all these issues that we are discussing here, you have been discussing yesterday, again, based on a good governance. I hope the governance is good enough. There's always improvements possible. I just want to maybe outline some elements which I believe are important to make sure that the EU engages in these smart partnerships and does not fall back into old patterns of the 19th or 20th century. One element is that there is a true equality, and that Europe buys into these communities. So it cannot be something where, for instance, the Western Balkans are left alone, organize among yourselves, and we are available to help you. No, Europe needs to take responsibilities as well, including financial responsibilities. That's what we learn inside Europe. That's an expression of solidarity, and it needs to be extended not in any watered down form, but in precisely the same way towards the Western Balkans. That's the essence of the Green Deal. That's the essence of the transition. And on top of that, we need, that's also governance, we need good and smart decision-making, which is also not one where we have one-way street decisions, take it or leave it situations, but based on a true dialogue and based on joint coming to solutions where we in Europe take serious what our partners put on the table, because we are all going through this situation together. That has been said, and we need to find the solutions in communities also together. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Mr. Noureddini, smart alliances was two words that Mr. Bushler used. Do you see that in the relationship between, for example, the EU and the Western Balkans? Is there a community? Is there a smart alliance? Or is there still something where can there be improvements on that one without exploitation?
Shall I be political or honest?
Be both critical and honest.
Listen, I'm sure there is an alliance, smart alliance. Right now, I think it's more an alliance of convenience for both sides, of course. Convenience, of course, for the EU because they want us to integrate as soon as possible. Alliance smart, very much so for us because we want to be part of the EU. I don't think anyone should question, at least North Macedonia's ambition to be part of the European Union. We want to be held accountable for our actions. We want to be held accountable for what we do. There is an alliance. I mean, there is this not only smart, it's necessary, it's actually absolutely necessary. We don't see ourselves anywhere else apart from within the EU. Hence why we are actually implementing, we're trying to write a lot of the laws or actually change the legislation and harmonize our laws with a lot of help from the energy community again here. So they're not easy. Because I said it earlier, and this is why I repeat it. I hope you don't mind me making this comparison, but I think sometimes we politicians think like hedge fund managers, because our mandates are 4 years long. A hedge fund manager needs to show results on a quarterly basis, and they need to show profits, which is actually votes, and if you actually compare it to that way. So politicians need to be showing some change, some drastic, great things which will benefit the citizens, and in tomorrow's elections we need to get more votes. However, though, maybe it's time we all start thinking like pension fund managers. Thinking in the long term, less return on investment, but in the long run it's actually more sustainable. So I said it earlier, and this government at least, in this energy crisis, we've been the first one which took the unbelievable decision to increase the electricity prices, because we have a capped electricity price in our country. It's regulated by regulator de facto, and we have actually increased the electricity price twice already. Because in the past there wasn't. It's not a liberal, it's not free. And we are unfortunately there where we are today. As mentioned as well earlier, we have not fully invested in energy efficiency. Due to the price, the very cheap price, if you ask me, what we have right now, cheap price of electricity in our country for the households and for the small and micro businesses, people have not invested in energy efficiency. And the idea was this, that after the pandemic, and I think this is where things went a bit wrong. I mean, went a bit wrong. They actually went really wrong, I'm sorry. The pandemic was very wrong. But so what happened was the idea that we have an economic recovery, a rebound. And the rebound was supposed to be in green investments. That was the whole idea. And I think the whole of Europe was doing the similar thing. A lot of European countries were looking to further invest in energy efficiency. It would create new jobs. It would actually use locally sourced and produced material. Unfortunately, the energy crisis came. And in our case, we had to sacrifice a lot of our budget to import electricity because we don't produce all the electricity we have, the needs we have. So we imported a lot at a tenfold of the price that we're selling at locally. And smart alliance, very natural alliance with the EU. I mean, President van der Leyen recently was in the Balkans, and she was delivering the allocations of the promised support, energy support. So, yes, absolutely.
So there's already, I asked you all to file in your questions via Slido using the hashtag PES 2022. And there's one here that's actually directly about this, because it says, how can the EU update and enhance its tools for supporting green transition in places such as Eastern Europe, but also Western Balkans? Like, what concretely should the EU do for this money?
As I said earlier, it's not about money. I mean, there's enough money around. I mean, we're hearing about, I don't know, how much was the Repower EU? 300 billion, 800 billion? What was the plan? I mean, it's numbers which are unfathomable. We're thinking about numbers which are, I mean, there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of money. We have to do our part as well, though. So we used to see ourselves, unfortunately, in the past, we were an island. We were a landlocked island, if that makes any sense. We had a zero interconnectivity with our neighbors. The only gas interconnector we have is with Bulgaria. Only now are we actually going to start building one with Greece. The only energy interconnectivity we have for electricity was with, I think it was only with Bulgaria as well. Now we're with Greece, we're building with Albania, we had, of course, with Serbia from historically. So we have to do our homework ourselves. It's not only what the EU can do for us. The question is, are we ready to accept what the EU is offering us as well? And it takes a lot of time. What the EU can do more for the Western Balkan countries is help with the technical documentation to be able to start the projects. This is one of the things that a lot of the Western Balkan countries lack. There's a lot of pre-accession funds. There's a lot of support being offered by the EU. What we lack is, unfortunately, to be prepared with the technical documentation, with the studies, on time, and as requested, in order to be able to use the funds being offered by the EU.
Thanks. I guess there is one question, though, that I think is, we're skirting through it a bit. It's sort of, but it is a bit of an elephant in the room, and that's looking at it from a consumer's perspective. Of course, we have seen big protests here in Prague. It's not all about high energy bills, but a lot of it is connected to it. I see my energy bills. And the big question here is really, and this is actually for all three of you, well, okay, fine, but how much is this going to cost us? And what do you answer a normal person on the street? Yeah, fine, okay, green transition, of course, but like, listen, I can't face my bill next month. How do we answer that question?
Shall I start?
Start, Dirk,
Yeah?
yes.
And again, I don't have a straightforward number, evidently. But I also want to develop a bit what Minister Noureddini said. These partnerships evidently need commitments from both sides. And we know what the European Union needs to do. It needs to treat the countries in the neighborhood as their own, whether this is through accession or through other forms of cooperation. There is always a preference for fast accession, but if not, we'll have to do something, an as-if. But that also requires commitments by the countries, and that's essentially what the energy community is also for, to make sure that reforms are taking place. I think, Minister Noureddini, you had a great metaphor of the hedge fund manager versus the pension fund manager. Sometimes I have the impression, and when we talk about real managers in the utilities, for instance, in the Western Balkans, there is no management at all. Taking responsibility, these are simple things. Corporate responsibility for decisions you take. These utilities, many of them are still stuck in the past. They don't have plans necessarily on how to move forward. A manager anywhere in Western Europe probably would be fired without a plan for the future. So I think earlier we heard about the rule of law. This is an abstract concept, but also these very general principles. Then, of course, something, and that comes to your question about the prices. The prices have always been low. We know that this is for good reasons in Western Balkans, in Ukraine, Moldova as well. And that's probably the reason why energy efficiency has not really been developing, why also there have been no investment signals that companies could take and take forward investments in the future. So yes, energy is a costly commodity. That's just something we cannot deny right now. We cannot, and I think we should not block that price signal, but we should develop cushions that protect, especially those that need to be protected from the impact. And there we can, I think, do more targeted support to those customers who are vulnerable, rather than to treating everybody equally and applying the same standards. And maybe the last thing, because the question also was what concretely can be done to get Europe and its neighborhood together in these communities in the European Green Deal, essentially. One thing that is lacking, one element, and I hope we can also discuss it with the minister, is giving carbon a price. That is something that Europe has been already for a couple of years and decades engaging in, and it has been a driver of the transition. Right now, doesn't matter so much because the gas price has been so high. But for the imminent future, I think it is important that also we send these price and investment signals through pricing in externalities.
Mr. Chairman, can I get your idea on this as well? Especially how do you convince people that they should be on board on this? Because they will obviously vote on the politicians who offer the simplest solution, usually turning the blind eye to it.
Sure. I think there have been different solutions in the different member states in the EU and beyond. But what is important for people is, I think, to make a difference, that the state makes a difference, that you don't subsidize everybody across the board, that those who actually have a multi-million euro businesses get higher subsidies simply because they have a higher turnaround. And the small kind of companies or the individuals don't feel supported enough. So we don't have everywhere the category of energy poverty, which gives you the instruments for some sort of a stratification. But because I am not an energy expert, but a foreign policy expert, if you allow me, I would add the kind of geopolitical layer to this. If we look at the Western Balkans especially, you will immediately realize that politicians use the public discontent to also steer geopolitically their countries. And here I mean primarily Serbia. We have quite clear kind of Russian energy narrative, if I can put it this way, that is very often popular in Serbia. And how do you turn this around so that people don't think that all the evil comes from the EU and all the benefits come from Moscow? I think this is part of your question on the price, because the price is not only what we pay at the end of the month. The price is what we pay in terms of our politics, right? How our politics function, how our political leaders make their decisions. And I think now people are very vulnerable, and publics are very vulnerable, because they can be very easily manipulated through the energy prices, through the energy decisions governments are taking, and we may end up in a situation whereby the EU actually pays a lot of money for supporting the vulnerable populations in the Balkans, but also within the EU itself, and yet governments kind of tend to misinterpret the situation, and still publicly, they end up not steering away from kind of the common foreign policy agenda of the EU. I'm saying this because we also have right now Hungary, for instance, blocking the borrowing for Ukraine, for the financial support of Ukraine. I mean, this is a real geopolitical problem that starts from the way politicians interpret, the whole core EU policies on the matter of, Russian weaponization, not only of energy, but geoeconomic tools in general.
Yes, you want to come in on the Serbia question?
No.
It's
for environment, not for politics.
There's a question here by Tommy that might be interesting for both Mrs. Chernova and Noureddin. It's like, do the Western Balkans cooperate in addressing the energy crisis, and where is the potential? Look at it from a North Macedonian perspective, and perhaps even from a Bulgarian one. I know you don't want to be called Western Balkans, but you're in the neighborhood. So the question is, do the Western Balkan countries cooperate in addressing the energy crisis, and where is the potential?
Very good one. I like that. Unfortunately, we haven't in the past, quite frankly. This is something we'll be speaking about with the energy community when Mr. Bushler here. And the idea is here, listen, we are all small countries in comparison to European countries. we all have the strategy of being very all energy independent. It's impossible, quite frankly. The idea is to actually have a regional energy strategy, and this is something we've been trying to start. I've spoken to my dear colleagues in the neighborhood, from the environment and energy, etc. We have different needs at different times of the year. You see, we are unfortunately, after the breakup of Yugoslavia, the whole thing, something didn't really continue to work as it did. Back then, it was being balanced through. So I think I'll use an example. For example, North Macedonia needs more energy in winter and less in summer. Vice versa, I'll use Albania, or our next neighbor. They need more energy in summer due to tourism and less energy in winter. So I think it is imperative that we actually create a regional collaboration between the countries for Serbia, Bulgaria, and it's not Western Balkan, it's the region, I'll call it the region. We need a regional approach. We need to have a interdependency between each other, and that interdependency, and the more you create the trade and depend on each other in a positive as an ally, I think it will just create better relationships, and somehow maybe we forget some of the issues we had in the past. And this will also not only create a solution for energy, but also for a political foreign policy things that we might have disagreed about in the past. We'll bring each other closer. If you don't mind, I'd just like to come back to your previous question, just a little bit, because I think it's important to look at it from an economic aspect as well. How do you try to convince your citizens that it's worth it? There's no choice. Sorry, is it worth it? Or we continue being dependent on the Russian gas, really, or we continue to move away and try and create find alternative sources. What had really happened here, and why have the prices really skyrocketed? Unfortunately, after the pandemic, we all thought we're going to have an economic rebound, a growth in GDP, and we're going to have one of the best times, one of the best periods ever. Unfortunately, that did not happen. We got into an energy crisis. The energy crisis shows how susceptible our economy is to energy. So we have an inflation rate of over 10% in some of the countries. Unfortunately, the growth is nowhere. So it's actually an inflation rate with no economic growth. So right now, that's why we're all finding it very difficult to pay for the bills, because if the economy grew at the same rate, we would have better wages, our wages would be increasing, and everything would be happy, production economy would be growing. Unfortunately, that's not happening. The economy is not growing anywhere close to the inflation that is being caused absolutely by the energy. So the reality, the real answer to citizens is, this can happen anytime. It can be used as a tool, as a weapon, if you want to call it, against our countries, against our citizens, anytime they want. Nord Stream can be shut. I mean, let's say we forget about it. The Nord Stream can be shut down any day of the week, and you're going to have the same issue. So we need to become less dependent. This is the answer, because we're going to be reliant, so we need to find other ways, other sources, other solutions. Otherwise, this will continue, and we are going to get poorer. We are getting poorer in reality. The money you had in your account yesterday is worth less than yesterday, 10% less than it was back then as today, and you can't buy close to the same thing you bought last year. I think I confused that a bit too much.
No, Mr. Chairman, but very clearly, Western Balkans cooperation, can Bulgaria play a role there, you think?
All the Western Balkan countries have different energy mixes, and this is one important kind of point of knowledge to have. There's some of them are actually much more into renewables. Others still very much rely on coal. Then there is a third group which is focused on fossil fuels. And so, I think having in mind this very complicated puzzle, you have to be able to create something that works together, and that's not that easy. This is why I think this whole idea of regional integration in energy is so important, and it's mainly about electricity. I agree with the minister. This is the easiest way to connect the neighborhood. Just do cables as many as you can. Do interconnectors, be it gas or hydrogen one day when that happens. And clearly, I would say we cannot talk about Western Balkans that much in this respect. We should be talking about the Balkans, including Greece, including Bulgaria, including Romania. This whole region should have, as I said at the beginning, much more south-north kind of logic in it in terms of its energy integration that it has now. Actually, Turkey there will play also a very, very important role. We haven't mentioned Turkey, but without Turkey, none of the energy diversification we have seen until now could not happen before we did the interconnection with Greece. So my point is, we cannot anymore treat this region as, separate groups, although countries can be very different in terms of how their energy is structured.
Guys, I'm nervously looking at my watch. We pretty much have done what we should have done, but still I want some sort of closing remarks and take a bit of time for people to, it's a coffee break, so you still can rush there 5 minutes later. So what I want you guys to do is, you talked about the pension manager, and that gave me an idea. So you're all 3 pension managers, now pension fund managers, and you're going to advise the masters of the world how they're going to deal with energy. And you're going to get 2 advices. How they're going to survive, not this winter, next winter, but all the winters in the future. So, pension fund manager Buchle, what 2 advices will you give me? How should we overcome this?
Well, I'm afraid I wouldn't probably get a lot of recognition for those advices, because they're all known. And the 2 advices would be something that's been in the political, legal, international sphere for very long. One is decarbonization, so that's the idea of the Paris Agreement. And the other one is what we have been discussing here, forming alliances, doing it together. There's a lot to be said about the Western Balkans, and how that in this microcosmos can be done better. We need to expand that to the world. It's important. As a pension fund manager, I need to know why to do that, not only to keep the pensions for those who need it. It's important to evidently face the crisis of climate, of global warming, but also to get out of this revolution, this industrial revolution, as a first mover, as a winner, and not as a loser. And I think we need to learn the lessons from the past and do this together, at least in Europe right now.
Pension fund manager Chernova.
Look, those who think about pensions, they also think a lot about the past. And I don't think we should be really, I mean, this is the danger, I think, that that we're facing, that we may be thinking about the past much more than we should. This is a little bit the spirit of the time. It seems that people currently are much more afraid of the future. They're much more fierce about the future. So we should not, and I'm saying this because the choice can be really between a decarbonization and energy security. And we don't realize this when we sit in Prague or Berlin or Brussels. But I think this is a very real danger, that we go back to old ways, that we go back to coal, that we go back to, using the same old kind of technologies that we know, simply because we're afraid for our security, energy security mostly, but not only. And so we have to overcome our fears. I think this would be my first advice. Don't look at the past that much. We'll get there. We just need to be a bit less fearless, a bit less fearful. Secondly, and we did not talk about the Global South, but I think this is my second piece of advice. When we look at the UN General Assembly, the big portion of African countries that did not vote in favor of the Ukraine resolutions tells us one thing. It tells us we have not been good enough in giving those countries the political space to work with us. We have to start rethinking our relationship, especially with Africa. And we have to really see how we can leave less space for China, for Russia in Africa. And this is, I guess this is a subject to a separate session, but this will first and foremost depend on the Europeans acting in a kind of open-minded, fair way, and really building up alliances that are not only smart, but where both sides have really the sense that they're on equal footing. That is, I think, our best way to bridge faster to the future.
So, Pension Manager Nuruddin, we have decarbonization, we have not being fearful about what's been, we have building alliances, Global South and elsewhere. Can you complete the picture with two advices?
Difficult, really. I have to go actually on the first one. I have to go first of all, the first one that we shouldn't, listen, every crisis creates opportunities. And every crisis that you can learn something out of it and walk out stronger. And the idea is to walk out of this stronger, walk out of it as winners, and I fully agree with that. We need to change, there's no question, that's it. And one of the reasons when I say pension fund, that's not my pension, it's actually my child's future. That's what I'm thinking about here. It's my child's future I'm talking about, or our children's future. That's the pension we should be looking at. So we need to walk out of this stronger. We realize that we have been maybe slightly, as you said, we shouldn't look too much better in the past, but we have been slightly reckless and haven't really thought about the fact of what these events could cause, how they could disturb our daily lives. The second one is actually a very, and please do not hate me for saying this, it's going to be tough. That's the advice. It's going to be tough. The next couple of years will be tough. Winter will be tough. Anybody who's saying things are going to be good, they're going to be great and rosy, I want to know what their magic solution is. These are going to be a couple of tough years. We need to bite the lip, get through it, be strong together, stand in solidarity, in absolute solidarity. That is a must. If we don't do that, then it's going to be difficult. So stand in solidarity, it's going to be tough. That's it.
And on that happy note, I thank you all three for coming here. Please give a warm applause to Mr. Nuruddin, Mr. Chernila, and Mr. Bushler. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricard. Thank you for a great discussion, for all your contributions. Now it's time for a coffee break. I will remind you the coffee break will take only 10 minutes. And at 10:25, we will start with another panel focusing on recovery and resilience plans, and we will be discussing the recovery in transport sector. So please now enjoy your coffee break and be back at 10:25. Ja, tak mám tady jenom stát zatím. Ještě dolů.
So you came yesterday from Prague?
Yes, you know, was to walk around, the weather is beautiful, the very nice pizza. I'm based in Luxembourg, I work for the European Investment Bank. No, I work in Geneva, Switzerland, but I'm also Italian.
Okay. You like it? Right.
Well, and the pizza was not bad. And then you, you're from Prague?
I'm from Prague.
So I was wondering how big is Prague? How many people live there? Half a million? 1.5? Because I was impressed by how big the pedestrian and historical center is. Yeah, I mean, it's really beautiful. Because I mean, it really came from, we were at the Alchemist Hotel.
Okay.
Also the American Embassy.
Yeah.
And basically from there, I mean, we walked quite long and it was all ancient and beautiful.
Yeah, it's
I mean, with the Philharmonic. Well, yeah, it's very good for the children.
Yeah?
Yeah, school is good, the class is good. And it's nice to walk in Korea. Well, you can travel and then try to have exactly.
Yeah.
parity. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, again. Let me welcome you at the next panel discussion. This time we will discuss the CEE recovery and resilience plans, accelerating the transition towards a zero-emission transport sector. Let me tell you that this particular panel is organized in cooperation with EIT Urban Mobility, and I am very happy that I can welcome here speakers and also the moderator. The moderator of this session is Katarina Svitkova, Research Fellow at European Institute for European Policy. It means one of the institutions that is organizing this Prague European Summit. So please, Katarina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome to all of you. I hope you did have a chance to get a coffee. And you're well refreshed. We will be welcoming more and more people coming in as we start. But now it's time to focus on our guests, our distinguished panel. As we heard, this panel is going to be dedicated to a very broad topic, which has a real momentum at this moment, which is the resilience and recovery plans and the wider financial instruments, funding instruments on the EU level in the context of transport and the green transformation of transport in the European Union, not just on the level of nation states and regions, but also on the level of cities. Which is why we have a great panel, which I'm going to welcome and introduce. Before I do that, though, just to give you a little bit of idea of how we're going to spend this hour, or 55 minutes that we have, we're going to have some introductory statements, and then we'll have time for questions. And at the end, and I want to highlight this, please, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we would like to hear from you. We would like to hear your ideas, your comments, your questions, and it's very easy for you to interact with us. All you need to do is go to slido.com or use the Slido app and enter the code hashtag PES 2022, which is where you can enter the questions which you're interested in as we go along with the panel, and we will make sure to have time at the end to direct those questions, some of those questions to our panel. So now please let me introduce. I will actually take it from the side and continue this way. So Mr. Christoph Weiss, Senior Economist of the Economics Department of the European Investment Bank. Welcome. Then we have Charlotte Norland Mathisen, Policy Advisor in the Cabinet of Commissioner of Transport Adina Vălean from the European Commission. Welcome. Mr. Simon Bilinski, Director of the Department of Electromobility and Hydrogen Economy at the Ministry of Climate and Environment of Poland. Welcome. And here we have Mr. Trajan Urban, the Director of the Innovation Hub East of EIT Urban Mobility. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you. Good morning.
Great. So now we're going to, I'm going to turn to our panelists because I asked them in advance to think about the main statement and the main message, because as I said, the times right now are really interesting, and we really see a momentum in the green transformation. And also yesterday and this morning, we heard very strong pledges of the continued commitment of the green revolution and the green transition in Europe, despite the political and the economic problems that we are facing right now, which are affecting us on many levels on industry or households as well. So there is this continued commitment, and I would like to ask our panelists, and we'll start with Charlotte, if I may. What is your main point in this context, which you would like the audience to take home today?
So I think I will use this more as an introduction, and then afterwards, when we get into the questions, I may have some take-home ideas as well. But as you may know, basically the European Commission, when we talk about transport, has an objective to reduce transport emissions by 90% by 2050. In doing so, we of course also have our interim targets by 2030, which is more global emission reductions of 55% by 2030. So we have these two milestones, 2030, 2050, and what we need to do now is really to bring all our efforts together in terms of policy and industry investments to get there. And I think I can start by that, and then we will get into more details as we go forward.
Great, thank you very much. Christoph, please.
Thank you very much indeed. And yes, so my intervention today will be organized around 3 different points about the transformation of the car manufacturing sector in the CSE countries. The first point, of course, is on the assembly plants in CSE. And the CSE region will continue to remain attractive for investment in assembly plants that will produce electric cars. The second point is the importance of the location of the production of the batteries that will go into those electric cars, those mega factories. And here again, it's key that the CSE countries continue to remain attractive and attract those mega factories for batteries. And my third point will be about charging infrastructure. Because so far the battery points are very unevenly distributed across Europe. Most of the charging points are actually in the Netherlands and Germany. You have very few in the CSE countries. And here again, you need charging points to have electric cars on the roads of the CSE countries. And during the panel, I will come back on those 3 points. Thanks again.
Thank you very much for those. We'll definitely be coming back to those points. Please, Simon.
Yes, I think that we are during the time of the energy transition or transition in transport sector, and what is the most important, you might say, no one lives behind. The transition in the transport sector should be fair, and the society should accept the changes in the energy sector. Without the fair transition, there will be no exception, and we will fail in the future.
Thank you for those comments as well. Traian Urban.
I will perhaps ask first, do you know EIT or EIT Urban Mobility, some of you here? Or some basic knowledge about what we are doing. So I will perhaps say that what we are doing, because in the beginning it's important. We are trying to put together all the different stakeholders in the ecosystem. It means companies, industry, universities, research centers, and the cities and citizens as well, to improve and make cities more livable in Europe. So this is our objective. And we are supporting on all kinds of innovation. We are supporting all kinds of business creation, supporting startups, supporting. We are, for example, focusing on a high educational system. So we are working with many prestigious universities, and we are cooperating with them on master programs and PhD programs. So we are trying to put together this KTH triangle to assure the innovation. And the innovation, it's what my colleagues were mentioning, and I think we will tackle it in the discussion more deeply.
For sure, thank you very much. So we do have different perspectives, different levels in this panel, talking about the transition in the transport sector, and all of the points that you raised are very relevant to that. Please let me start with a bit of a bigger and European perspective, which is why I will turn to Charlotte as well. So do you think we are seeing a momentum when it comes to green transition in transport, despite the political and economic challenges that we're facing right now?
The short answer, yes. The longer answer, in what we are seeing when we look specifically at e-mobility on the road, is that the take-up of electric vehicles has accelerated much more than what we thought it would over just the last years. Basically, last year we came out with the Fit for 55 proposals, which is a package of proposals to reach the Green Deal objectives. And with this package, we had a number also of what we call staff working documents and background supporting analysis to see the, let's say, the projection of how and when we will get there. And when we look at these today, we see that it's going much faster than what we expected, basically. That being said, the take-up of infrastructure is not going as fast as the take-up of EVs. And this is also why we have proposed the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation last year, and which is a proposal that is now just starting by being negotiated by co-legislators, and which is proposing binding minimum targets for the rollout of infrastructure across the EU. So that means what we're proposing is to have, from the Commission side, let's see what the co-legislators agree on, but we are proposing 60 kilometers, every 60 kilometers on the main corridors across the EU to have a recharging point by 2025, and even stronger outputs in terms of kilowatts by 2030. So that's only by talking about electric recharging, but of course we are also looking at hydrogen. So I think, and this push that we're seeing and massive rollout will only be reinforced also by the fact that just a few weeks ago, the co-legislators agreed very quickly and ambitiously on the phase-out of the internal combustion engine. So by 2035, car manufacturers will not be selling any more combustion engine cars anymore. So, of course, that doesn't mean that there won't be any more combustion engines cars on the road by 2035, but it is also one of these legislative pushes that will help us to drive the total cost of ownership of electric cars down, and in the same time to ensure that we have economies of scale that will help us to have more various models of electric vehicles also that are more accessible in terms of price. Because indeed, and I think this is also one of what we're discussing here at the panel today, prices of electric cars are still too high, and we also see a differentiation in the different markets. But here there will be an important role also of the second-hand market cars for electric cars as well, when, for example, in today's second-hand markets in Europe, many of the, let's say, car second-hand markets in Central and Eastern Europe come from Northern or Western Europe, and are not necessarily imported from abroad. And this we can expect also for electric cars, in the sense that you have rental cars, for example, that will soon create a second-hand market also for electric cars. So I think this is kind of touches already on a lot of topics, but yeah.
It definitely does, and thank you for that comment. I do think that we can agree that the commitments of the on the level of Europe are very strong and very definitive, and going in the right direction. Also, of course, the implementation is going to might differ depending on the regions that we're talking about. You touched on the charging infrastructure and the whole issue of price sensitivity, which is an issue in Central Eastern Europe. I'm sure we'll get to that. Trine had a comment or follow up.
Absolutely. I agree that we need in the Central and Eastern Europe better charging infrastructure, and I'm happy that we have the representative of European Commission here, because they need to know, and they know for sure that the current situation in the Czech Republic, Hungary, or Romania, it's very different comparing to Denmark, or comparing Sweden, comparing Holland. And of course, if we want to promote more the using the electric vehicles, we need to assure the infrastructure. So this is something what was also prepared by the European Commission regulation now, and discussed during the French presidency. And I am convinced also that the Czech government and other governments will support these steps to assure that it will be easier. Also very important is the second-hand market, perhaps coming from other countries, because the level of incomes or level of economical situation, let's say, in the Eastern and Central European countries is different. So the second-hand market can be very helpful to start to use these electric vehicles. And the third point, which I would like to mention, it's not just focus on the electric vehicles. We need to focus also on alternative fuel methods, let's say, for example, hydrogen or multimodality. So it means connecting bicycles, trains, some other modes of transport with cars, and the sharing cars, of course, it's also one of the important topics. It was mentioned with my colleague. So this is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to stay a little bit longer on the topic of the charging infrastructure, because it is a key element of what we're talking about when we discuss clean mobility and e-mobility in Europe and Central Eastern Europe. I would like to pose this question to Simon. Are the EU countries on the right path if you focus on the Central and Eastern Europe, but you could also contextualize it with the wider EU level?
I don't know if they're on the right path. I think that we have, as it was said, the discussion on AFIO, on the alternative fuel regulation, and CE countries have a different opinion than maybe Western countries, and mostly because of the development of the market of the electric vehicles. Because if we think about the development of charging infrastructure, I think we have two basic scenarios. First, that the number of charging stations is sufficient to meet the current usage of the charging points. And second scenario is that we deploy higher number of charging stations than we need. And the different stakeholders of the electromobility market have different view of that, because charging point operators, they would like to have the sufficient number of charging stations, because for them it is an income. The higher number for them is the risk of stranded asset. And if we discuss in Poland the deploy of the charging infrastructure, we also think that if the number of charging stations will be higher than the current usage, is the risk for CPO, for stranded asset. And we cannot forget about the electricity grid. If we would like to deploy, for example, fast charging network or fast charging station, we need to have the grid that could be used if we would like to charge our cars with 300 kilowatts. So, and if we have the charging station and no one will use the fast charging station, then we have the stranded asset. And on the energy market, who will pay for the grid? All consumers will pay the cost of the modernize the grid. So that's why we always say that the development of charging infrastructure should be connected with the development of the electric car market. And we should deploy the sufficient number. But of course, from the point of view, the owner of the electric vehicles is better if the number of charging stations is higher. Because if you start the journey with electric vehicles, you would like to have, you need to be sure that you will be able to charge the car. And we still have this discussion in Poland, but We support the development of charging station. Last year we introduced the program on 200 million euros to develop the charging station in Poland, and the money for this program, it was very hard. A lot of entities would like to use this money. I think the call was ended in 2 weeks. So the companies would like to invest in charging station in Poland. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, definitely there's a big push, but as you mentioned, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem when it comes to a lower absolute number of electric vehicles in Central and Eastern Europe. Also, we will have logically lower number of charging stations. But as you know, the Recovery and Resilience Fund that is now will be implemented based on the national plans, based on the specific national plans. It does place a big emphasis on charging infrastructure as well. And for example, specifically the Czech one counts with electrifying not just different modes of transport, but also when it comes to charging infrastructure is definitely part of the plan, the huge investment plan going forward for these couple of years. I would like to go now to Chris again, because you did mention 3 important points there that you wanted to elaborate on. I would like to ask you to kind of highlight or think about, when you talk about them, the competitiveness of Europe on the global stage, because we know that electronic vehicles are very much also going to be developed and manufactured in China. How can Europe stay competitive? How can European manufacturers stay competitive in the context of what's happening right now?
Yes, thank you. So this transition to electric batteries for small car and green hydrogen technology for larger trucks will require significant investment. And in the short term, we're in a context of tightening financial condition. There was the hit of COVID-19 that led to a significant decrease in the demand of new cars. And there are, of course, some strategic implication for the CSE region. You have approximately more than 220 assembly plants in Europe, and the CEC has been very good at attracting those plants over the past 20 years. In 2000, about 70% of the cars were produced in Northern and Western Europe, the US and Japan. In 2020, it was only 1/3, and the CSE region has really attracted many assembly plants, but some assembly plants have also gone to other emerging economies. And the region really needs to put in place the conditions to remain attractive for the plants. It means also investment in human capital, to have the engineers. It means general infrastructure, the entire ecosystem. Of course, the transformation to the electric batteries will have significant implication for the entire industry. It's less complex to build an electric car. A combustion engine has many more parts. So this also will have implication for employment in the region. And that's why also a need for the CSE region to increase the value added and move up the value added chain in the production of cars. So yeah, and this comes with investment in human capital. Very briefly, we need this transformation of the transport sector, because the transport sector is responsible for almost 30% of total CO2 emissions. And unlike many other sectors, it's a sector where emissions continue to grow. And car passengers represent about 12% of total emissions. So you need rapid change, and that's why the European Commission has taken action, and it's very important that there is a rapid follow-up. I mean, it's urgent to transform the sector, and it's urgent for CSE country to attract the assembly plants that will produce the electric part, the electric cars, and they've been quite successful. But again, on top of having the assembly plants that produce those electric cars, you also need to have the factories that produce the batteries. And currently, China represents more than 70% of cell manufacturing. We have seen with COVID-19 significant shocks and disruptions to trade. And there has been a number of questions on strategic relocation of also the production of batteries. And here, again, the CSE region needs to remain attractive to attract those mega factories. And this comes with the entire infrastructure, but also, again, investment in human capital. I will stop here and come back on the other points later. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a question on Slido already, which I'm going to go straight away because I do think it is important to note. Now we're talking about individual mobility and it's the infrastructure and the investment that it needs in order to become greener and cleaner. But also it's important to say that individual mobility isn't going to solve all our problems, and this is where we come especially to the level of cities, because public transport is a huge area where clean mobility has taken off by means of different innovations. And I would like to ask Trajan to elaborate a little bit on what the role of cities and public transport in greening the public transport might be in this whole transformation.
I mean, every city it's different. So I'm always very careful to say that we have one recipe to solve problems of all the cities, because if you are comparing the big cities like Paris and other small cities like Brno or others, so they have completely different needs, the completely different challenges, and we need to speak with the cities. We need to see what are the needs, what are the challenges, and based on this, how is the public infrastructure, how the people are moving in the city, and all the details, all the data. It's very important to work with data, because if you don't have the data from the city, it's complicated to make something measured for the city. So you need to know the needs of the city, and after you need to decide, or the city needs to decide with own citizens, how would be best to solve the problems of transport in the city. Of course, I see in most of the cities the problem or the thing of multimodality or intermodality. It's very important, because the public transport is one point, but for example, if you are living outside of the city and you don't have efficient transport to come to the center, so at least you need to come to some railway station where the train pick you up and brings you to the center, and from the center you can take a bicycle or bus, and you can go to the work. And it can be 30 minutes, and it's efficient, and it can be green, and it can be useful for everybody. So in all cities, I think you need to see the particular problems, and the public transport, it's of course one of the situation, one of the modes which are most important. I was recently, for example, in Tel Aviv. They don't have the metro stations, and they are now planning with the huge city of Tel Aviv to build metro stations. Of course, you can imagine it's very complicated, because you have to go under the city and build the lines and prepare all the infrastructure. But basically now you cannot move in Tel Aviv, because there is so many startups, companies, the people, and they need to solve this problem somehow, and they are preparing these metro station lines, even if it's complicated now. So we, for example, in Prague, we are very lucky that we have some of the infrastructure already built, and this is one of the basic stones in the public infrastructure for citizens.
So how do you think those lessons from Israel, as you're saying, there are many examples and many lessons and interesting success stories. If you think about the context of an average Central European city, what do you think? What kind of initiative do you think would be kind of translatable, or what is the key thing that is missing for now, when you compare it to Israeli cities, that you think would be a good way forward?
I think in many cities they would like to pilot something, to try something, and we see that the public procurement processes are very complicated for them. So I think one problem for the city to be more flexible in this way, it's the public procurement, make it, for example, easier or somehow more efficient. And of course, we see the human resources problem, because many of the city, they don't have the concrete department or people which can dedicate time to pilot something or to try something what can work, and after it can be scalable and can be used for the beneficial of all citizens in the city.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to now go back to Christoph, because you did have your third point to add before we move to more concrete questions. So I'll give the floor to you now.
No, so very briefly, just to recall that the European Investment Bank is the public bank of the European Union, is one of the financial instruments of the European Union. And of course, we fully align with the Paris Agreement. The EIB is also the EU's climate bank, and we fully support the priorities of the European Commission and the European Green Deal. And again, transforming the sector, in particular in the CSE region, has implications for cohesion policy. It has also implication for support to R&D. We need more research and development in electrical battery, in green hydrogen, in those mega battery factories, but also in recycling of those batteries, so that the sector starts to have a much more circular economy approach. We talk about second-hand cars. We also need to do something with the batteries in the cars that will stop being driven on the road. We need to invest significant amounts in how to better recycle, because, again, those are limited resources that you put in those electric batteries. And here it's a real question of how we're going to take that forward. More generally, there is support to energy policy. You cannot have assembly plants or mega factory if the electricity that is used comes from brown sources. And so you really need to have more general important question on renewable energy, in particular in the CEC region, because this will also be key for the region to remain attractive, to attract those assembly plants, those mega factory, and also for the charging points, because if you have charging points, you would hope that the electricity that goes into the cars comes from renewable energy. The second point is, of course, the EIB support also SMEs and innovative SMEs, because there is a need for the automotive sector to reinvent itself with the move to electric batteries and green hydrogen. And the last point is, the support on cohesion policy and the priorities of the European Commission that are, it's urgent to act, and it's urgent to make investment in a context of financial, tightening financial conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Actually, I wanted to react on that, and especially with regard to what you said on batteries, which I think is a really good point, and I think this is also why since 2017 the Commission has put in place the European Battery Alliance, which is a very strong alliance with over, I think now, 700 members, and basically the Battery Alliance is supporting all these types of battery projects across Europe, and industries and startups and research and innovation. And when we talk about Central and Eastern European countries, indeed there's also a strong presence of CEE investment and companies, and notably in Poland and Bulgaria, as far as I understand. Maybe you can correct me, but and on top of the EBA, the European Battery Alliance, this mandate under Ursula von der Leyen, we have also started the horrible acronym IPCEIs, the very important projects of European common interest, and basically which is a way to grant subsidies for very large projects, such as mega battery factories. So let's say going a little bit around state aid rules in these very specific cases where there is a European interest. And this comes, of course, on top of the battery regulation that was adopted only recently also, that looks at recycling of batteries between others.
Yes, Jan wanted to follow up on that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, reusing and recycling the batteries. We are, as CIT Urban Mobility, we are financing the most innovative project in Europe, and that's a pity that the representative of Škoda Auto is not here today with us. But we were supporting them with one very interesting project about recycling the old batteries from cars. So they are using these old batteries and using it for charging infrastructure and deposition of the energy for example, some local needs in the city. So this is one of the first projects of recyclation of the battery. They are able to make use of 97% of the old battery from the cars for other purposes. So this is one of the main things also we have to focus on the recycling economy in the future.
I'm jumping in again here, actually, because maybe I'm just wanting to get back to the previous topic about cities as well, where I'm a little bit name dropping here, but another important piece of initiative that the Commission proposed recently is the urban mobility framework. And this urban mobility framework has the intention really to ensure that the Commission, as much as possible, can give support to cities in ensuring our transition to clean mobility. Of course, cities here are very much in their lead of their own decisions and what they want to do. But if there is a need for coordination, the Commission is there to help on all these different matters. And one of the tools to help is the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans, the SUMPs, that cities put in place themselves. But in a few months, probably early next year, we will be proposing a recommendation to member states on the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans national support programs, which will be, from the Commission's perspective, a recommendation on how, let's say, national and city experts as well, independent city bodies, not city, but like EIT, for instance, maybe, could help cities, especially smaller cities that are a little bit sometimes, as you say, also in need of main d'œuvre,
assistance?
Yeah, assistance in terms of work. They don't have enough people, resources, that's the word. And so their national support could be an important tool.
Thank you, Charlotte. I guess this could be a question for both you and Trajan. Just staying a little bit longer on the topic of cities. Thank you for mentioning the SUMPs, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans. This is something that has resonated in this context because oftentimes, there is an argument that cities are sometimes much faster and quicker and more kind of strong change makers when it comes to implementation. When it comes to implementation of green technology, etc., because of course it's where you have to kind of realize things on the ground, and you have cities. Many times you have city leadership that is very, very much kind of forward-looking and kind of leaning towards the transformation, green transformation. For example, in Prague, the plan has been published, and it's quite ambitious. So, do you think? I don't want to play devil's advocate, but do you think cities could be kind of the push makers, or the more kind of spearheading the whole transition as opposed to the national level of where things usually take more time and get more complicated?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, depending on the city, because some of the city they are advanced a lot. We are, for example, piloting things in autonomous vehicles in Helsinki, so they are using autonomous bus. And of course, behind this, it's talking with citizens, explaining everything, preparing the regulation, etc. Because it's not an easy topic; it's very complex. The same, for example, in Rotterdam or Torino, they are piloting deliveries with drones. On the river or in the harbor. So these are things which are coming from the cities because they have some special needs. They want to try something, and after they are coming with the information, it's possible, but we need to do this kind of regulation, or it's not possible, we have to change. So this is coming from the city, and I think the cities are playing the crucial role. And I would also encourage the cities to invest perhaps more in these human resources in this department, because you need professional people to deal with these topics and be informed about what is happening in Europe or worldwide to be able to pilot something, to try something, and to innovate in your city.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go back to the little bit to the charging question. Simon, because I do see a very interesting question on Slido, which I'm going to paraphrase. There is the question is, why is the EU supporting hydrogen in automotive industry if electric cars are more viable? Could we just stop here for a bit and maybe contextualize in what ways and what forms are electric vehicles more viable than hydrogen? Because we know that there are different types of vehicles that make more sense with hydrogen, and then passenger smaller vehicles with the electric charging. So could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, but hydrogen cars are electric cars. But electricity is produced from the hydrogen in the fuel cells. And we're not charging the battery of the cars. But this is a very interesting discussion, because in the transport sector we discuss a lot about which fuel is the best. And if you look, I think that there was a lot of different analysis that suggest that maybe the best are the electric battery cars, because they are the most efficient on the energy side. Because if you would like to use a hydrogen car, you need to produce the hydrogen. If you would like to have the zero-emission hydrogen car, so the hydrogen should be produced from the renewable energy sources, or from some kind of it should be low-emission hydrogen or zero-emission hydrogen. And during the process of production of this hydrogen, there is energy losses. And then when you produce electricity from the hydrogen, you also have the energy losses. So in the whole process, you probably will need more energy to produce hydrogen and to induce the hydrogen in the cars. But from other hand, if you would like to develop the battery electric cars, so you need the batteries. And there's also the problem about the size of the battery, because if we would like to use the battery in long distance transport of goods, so the batteries are very big, so the truck will take less goods, and there are costs. So if you would like to use battery trucks, there is the discussion about the way how the goods are transported in European Union. So I think, in my opinion, the battery cars are the best for the passenger cars when we talk about the passenger cars. But in the transport sector, I see the future of the hydrogen. But this is only my opinion, because when we discuss this problem with the producer of the trucks, like German producers on Volvo, they believe in the battery trucks. So I don't know, to be honest. But from the side of the infrastructure, the battery trucks it will be difficult to implement, because we can imagine the parking lot with 100 electric buses, electric trucks, and every truck will be charged. So we need the power that we need. We think that it's 5 megawatts. So it's the power that we need for this small village. It's a lot of the power, but these trucks should be charged, because the goods have to go to the consumers. So this could be the problem, but from other hand, as I said, the producers of the vehicles will see the future in the battery car. So did I answer the questions?
Thank you. Thank you. Charlotte, you wanted to follow up?
Yes, maybe from the perspective of at least what we've put on the table on legislation, and especially alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, how the thinking behind indeed this question of batteries versus hydrogen. First of all, of course, the Commission in its energy policy and in transport policy were technology neutral. And the idea also behind technology neutrality is that in the end it's the market that has to figure out, let's say, what is the most efficient and cost-effective solution. At the same time, there's another probably reason to why we are technology neutral, and that is more linked to diversification. And especially in the context of what we're seeing right now with the energy crisis, we can only imagine a future where there could be a cyber attack on the energy grid, and what do we do then? The electricity grid, I mean. So this is, let's say, probably an underlying question of why diversification and hydrogen plays an important role. Now, of course, the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation has also set out infrastructure requirements for hydrogen, which is intended to be used both for, in the way we've formulated it in the proposal, for both trucks and cars. So it's we're not saying that the hydrogen infrastructure should be used by cars or trucks, but it because of the way hydrogen refueling works, we foresee that the first refueling points on the market could be used by both vehicles types. And then let's see what the market will deliver. And indeed, even for cars, maybe, and this is my own opinion, there may be specific situations in mountainous areas or in specific use cases where electric is maybe not the ideal solution. So we're not excluding anything at this stage, but indeed we need to ensure what is the most cost efficient and sustainable.
Thank you.
If I may add one thing, because there's also one other solution that we will forget sometimes synthetic fuels. This is also the solution as alternative fuels, the synthetic fuels from hydrogen. And if we use the synthetic fuels, there will be no need to change our vehicles, because synthetic fuels can be used in combustion engines. But maybe I shouldn't say that as electromobility department director, but still.
Thank you very much for those comments, for those kind of more technical comments as well. But I think these are very important when we actually talk about implementation on the ground. To actually talk about these issues. I would like to come back.
I just forgot to, sorry, I forgot to say something. It's that when speaking to different manufacturers, truck manufacturers, there is indeed, they're not betting just on batteries. It depends on the manufacturer. Some are betting on both and investing in both electric and hydrogen trucks. Some are looking at just one technology, but this is a business decision, of course, and but we already have both types, hydrogen trucks and electric trucks, available today on the market. So.
Thank you. And from technology and the technological aspects, I would like to jump to the human aspect as well. You know, we've mentioned several times the human capital, the question of human capital, and capacity building of the workforce, because it is true and it's a reality. So we have to kind of count with that in the Central and Eastern European countries, the automotive industry is a very big employer. It's big part of the industry, of the economy, and employs many people. So there is a question, and it's sometimes connected to a bit of a political discussion as well. How do we help? How do we help those companies and to help the workforce, the people, to kind of build their capacity to go through this change and to refocus on different modes of manufacturing, different modes of different technologies, etc. How can the EU and the nation states help these major manufacturers to help with the capacitation of the workforce?
So very briefly, but I will give the floor to my colleagues as well. This is why I suggested earlier, it's very important that the CSE country, when it comes to assembly plants or even gigafactory, are not only attractive because of cheap labor. I mean, it really needs to be the quality of the workforce and move up also on the value-added part of assembling those cars. And this will require significant investment. Of course, the EIB supports cohesion policy, supports the priorities of the European Commission, and we make a significant investment in education, in university, and so forth and so on. But yeah, you really need a rethink in that. And I think developing an innovative ecosystem, when you think, cars and trucks, increasingly the value added is actually in the software. That brings those trucks. If you think about even autonomous driving, the software that you have in those cars will be significant, and that's where you need investment in engineering, but IT, and not necessarily directly in car manufacturing experts, but you need to have a broader perspective. And then very briefly, if I can come back on the trucks, for personal reason, I'm a strong believer in transportation of goods via rail. And I think increasing and scaling up in investment in rail infrastructure, in the TEN-T program, so those trans-European network, will also be significant. And you touch upon the idea of intermodality, and I think there as well, you need significant investment in intermodality. Transporting goods by rail is probably much more efficient. Again, you need clean energy that goes into the electric lines. I'm going to stop here. I slightly changed topic, but you can come back where you want.
No, that's okay. I would actually take you up on that, because I do think it's important that we talk about that as well. The railways and the electrification of railways, of the existing infrastructure, is also an important part of the National Recovery and Resilience Package on the level of many nation states. This is also what is in the part of the plans In the Czech Republic, for instance, it will focus significant funding on this area as well. We are unfortunately running out of time, or we will be in a couple of minutes. So I do have a question, more of a broader question, which I will answer from each of you, and that is about obstacles. If you were to think about one single obstacle that is impeding the implementation of green, clean, and sustainable mobility from your viewpoint, what is this one single obstacle, and how do you think it could be solved? And we do have about 1 or 2 minutes per speaker, so let's start from this side.
Okay. So I would say we need to put together all the different actors in the ecosystem. It means the city with industry, with research, with startups, with companies which are inventing some products or services. And of course, we need to inform the citizens. So it needs to be collaboration of all the stakeholders what will be implemented, because in that way, nobody will be surprised, and the majority of the people will decide on the way or direction where we want to move, and it will work. If we will not be able to put together the research and industry and the citizens, it will be complicated to make any change. So I think this is the biggest obstacle, and one of the objectives of EIT Urban Mobility is to work together with all the stakeholders and support the most innovative project, test them, show if it's working, how it's working, and after we are prepared to scale, or the companies or research center they are prepared to scale this pilots on their bigger level.
So, in other words, collaboration, lack of collaboration in this area between stakeholders is what you think is the biggest.
More connection, I would say.
Yes, more connection is needed. You take the positive approach. It's good.
Yeah, always.
Simon, please.
I think what we need to do in the future, we should connect the transport sector plan with energy sector plan, because what I think could be the most obstacle, that the lack of the energy for the electromobility. Our whole economy will be used in the future more and more electricity, and we need to connect this to perspective of grid development, of energy production with the plans for electromobility.
A very valid point. Thank you for that.
Yes, I was actually going to say the same as you, Simon, in the sense that we're really on a roll here. I think in some way we have legislation going, we have objectives, investments are coming. Also from the EU, there's funding, but at least when we look especially at the e-mobility side of things, the main obstacle today we see is really also access to the grid, and that also actually relates back to the question of how we make the different stakeholders speak together, to ensure that the objective at EU level is linked with basically the local authorities who are responsible for giving access to the grid. So I think I would very much agree here with the previous speakers also that it's about speaking together and making the connections and ensuring the link between energy and transport.
Thank you.
So in addition to what my colleague said, so the economics department of the EIB every year conducts a survey on firms in Europe, on more than 13,000 firms every year. And we ask them, what do you consider the main obstacles to investment? And when we look at the structural long-term obstacles to investment, of course, we have finding people with the right skills. So not necessarily finding people with high skills, but the right skills as a major obstacle to increase investment for corporate, for firms in Europe. A second obstacle is uncertainty. And uncertainty can be about economic condition, can be also about regulation. And I think when it comes to the transport sector, the European Commission is really helping to have some obstacles it's clear that what we have in the latest survey of the EIB investment survey is that energy costs are starting to become a major obstacle to investment for firms in Europe. It was not the case in previous ways, in previous years, but with the energy crisis, energy costs are becoming an obstacle to investment in Europe. And another obstacle is access to finance. So tightening financial condition will postpone, lead to the postponement of some investment in Europe. And here again, I think financial support grants from the European Commission will make a difference to support cohesion policy and industrial transformation in the CSC country.
Thank you very much, Christoph. I think that's a great statement to actually finalize this panel. So I would like to thank all of you for joining us today for what was a very insightful discussion with comments from all of you. So please, let's give a round of applause to our speakers. Thank you very much.
Much, Katarina, and thanks for all our speakers for a very insightful discussion with concrete measures, concrete advice, how to make the transition happen successfully and easily. We are now setting the scene for the European chat, so another discussion. This time we will focus on the war returning to Europe, and we will discuss how the war in Ukraine changed the EU and also how it changed Ukraine. And we will have interesting guests here on the stage. The moderator of this discussion, of this European chat, is Rob Cameron, BBC Prague correspondent who is covering social politics, business, art, and also many other topics. And as a guest, we invited the representative of the Embassy of Ukraine in Prague, Andrei Kolesnichenko. So I think that our scene is ready, so I would like to invite our speakers to join me here on the stage, and we can start. It's true that we are slightly behind the schedule, but then there is the lunch break, so I think that we can keep the 20 minutes for discussion as was scheduled in the program originally. So I would like now to pass the floor to Rob Cameron to moderate this European chat on war in Ukraine and its impact on the EU and Ukraine itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope this is working. Obviously, Russia's brutal war against Ukraine has caused an immense, a seismic shock across the European continent, and it's fundamentally changed the context in which political decisions are being made. Europe is only now adapting to the challenges that stem from this new reality that we all woke up with on that terrible morning of February 24th, 2022. But it's also mobilized, I think, a swift and united action by member states of the European Union, which in many ways is more or less unprecedented. And it's led, I think, to a rethinking of the EU's approach to its near abroad, to its neighborhood. So with that in mind, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Andrei Kolesnichenko, who is the first secretary for economic issues at the Embassy of Ukraine. Andrei has told me he was born in born in Lviv, but grew up in Kyiv, went to school there, and lived there until recently. So, Andrei, thank you very much for joining us. I think it's working.
Yes, thank you also for being here. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I think it will be good discussion with you.
Great. Well, let's jump right in. I mean, let's just bring us right up to date. I appreciate that you are mostly concerned with economic issues, investment, and trade. So, in other words, your focus is banks rather than tanks. But you, as a Ukrainian, I'm sure, are very aware of what is going on both banks of the Dnipro River around Kherson and what we're seeing here. Do you think that Russia's withdrawal from the right bank of the Dnipro River and the city of Kherson if it is indeed a withdrawal, is this, as some people are saying, a real turning point in this war?
Well, first of all, I think it's not a withdrawal, but it's we push them back. So we pay for this with the life of our soldiers, and we're pushing them back, and they had to leave. I hope that really soon we will be in Kherson and bring back Kherson to normal life. But unfortunately, I don't know, and nobody probably, what the Russia gonna do. And will they bomb Kherson from the other side of the river and destroy it, or what they gonna do? So it's really, it will be like a victory, but still it's only one step to win, to our win. So yes, it is how it's one step forward to, but we'll see what will be.
If this retreat, call it what you will, withdrawal from Kherson does happen, it will be very difficult, even for Russia's very well-developed propaganda apparatus, to sell that to the Russian people as anything else but a disaster. Kherson, of course, was the first regional capital that was taken by Russia and the only one that remained in Russian hands. To lose that after so many Russian dead, so many losses, it's just a catastrophe for Moscow, isn't it?
Catastrophe. You know, the propaganda is very, very good in Russia. But yes, since, you know, they have those groups in not Instagram, Telegram, and all social medias, and people of Russia didn't understand what they did do. And yes, it will be very hard for them to say why are they doing this? Why they retreat, as they say. So it will be a problem, but as you can see, they did it not even once. They did it with Zmyini, with all the other territories we have deoccupied. So I don't think it will some influence in the politics and in the military of their country.
But it's yet another setback, isn't it? I mean, there was Kyiv, and then Kharkiv, and now Kherson.
Yes.
So it's just this rolling series of setbacks and defeats and withdrawals. And
it will continue. It will surely continue, and it will continue until we get all our land back.
Right. Well, I don't know if you know the quote by Ernest Hemingway, who was once asked how he went bankrupt. And he said, suddenly, and then very quickly. So maybe the same thing will happen to Putin. I don't know.
Hope so.
How do you think Russia's war against Ukraine has reshaped the political dynamics, the relations in this part of the world, in Central and Eastern Europe? Because some are saying that this really strong leadership shown by countries such as Poland, such as the Baltic states, such as, of course, this country, in terms of really muscular, unequivocal support for Ukraine in the form of tanks and artillery and money and moral support as well. Are we seeing the center of Europe's gravity shifting eastwards to this part of the world after decades of being dominated by those big economies, France and Germany?
I think that, first of all, I would like to thank all the European society and governments for such a big help that we are receiving, and especially the Czech Republic, which was one of the first who was given all the support that we need, not all, but support that we truly need. And yes, I think that nowadays not a question if Ukraine is part of Europe or it's obvious. So yes, it is a little bit shifting, and we'll see what will be after the war. But Ukraine will be some kind of border and Platzdarm from this aggressor.
But where does Kyiv, President Zelensky and all his people, where do you see your real closest allies and friends now? Do you think that's changed, and that now you see countries like the Czech Republic and Poland, the Baltic states and so on, Finland as your closest, most important allies, or is it still the traditional big, powerful countries in Western Europe and the United States?
We receive support from all Europe. So yes, they are strong, our partners, like the countries you mentioned, and they will be in future. It's understandable, but I think the whole Europe and the whole civilized world is on our side, and I think we keep the relation that we are now.
Right. And what about looking on a wider level, the impact that the war is having on the global alliances and the idea that the world is being reshaped in real time, partly thanks to this war, and what is emerging is a much more clearly defined block of autocracies, Russia, China, Iran, on one hand, and these liberal democracies under pressure, facing great economic, political challenges, but still, in a way, strengthened by this challenge that they have had to face, such as this country and Europe and America and Canada and so on. Where do you see the place not only of Europe but of Ukraine as these blocks perhaps emerge from the mists and become much firmer in our imagination, at least?
First of all, I think that we are already de facto the part of NATO. So it's now only to make it de jure, because we receive a lot of equipment, and I think even the NATO will be interested to have such an army as we have nowadays, who unfortunately has this experience of this war. But in a global level, these aliens they have to face these challenges, and I'm sure that they will change. So it won't be the same. Some of them show their weaknesses, some of them show their strength position, but we will see what will be. But as I see Ukraine as a part of NATO and a part of Europe. It's for sure. And also, if we talk about Russia, there is some partnership with Iran. You know, they sold Russia about more than 400 of these kamikaze drones.
Shahad drones.
Yes, and if they didn't, it will quite help us. So there are some like bilateral alliance, but we'll see.
Yeah. You mentioned there that that NATO could benefit from having a country like Ukraine in it simply because of this terrible ordeal that your armed forces have undergone. I think someone made a very good point fairly early on in the war, perhaps sometime in the summer. Some source within NATO is saying, no, we shouldn't be training the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians should be training NATO troops because they are, unlike the rest of us, actually fighting a war on European soil. Perhaps that's a little overblown. But
it's not like this. We also need to be trained, our soldiers, in NATO standards. But in some cases, yes.
Yeah. And where do you see your future as a country? I mean, when you close your eyes and imagine that future Ukraine for you, and I know you have children, and what kind of Ukraine would you like to see them grow up in? It's really, I think you would admit that for many years, Ukraine has been very much on the fringes of our European imagination, and now it's much, much closer. But do you think it can be brought in to the heart of Europe?
Yes, I think that Ukraine will be it is already the part of Europe, and it will be more involved in EU. And as I see Ukraine, it will be nowadays we must already start our rebuilding process of Ukraine, not to wait for the end of the war, because the life is going on and the economy must work. So it is very important to bring new technologies, to rebuild, not only to rebuild, but to modernize our cities in our country, and to bring all the new things we can to our country and make it greater than ever. So,
but I know that, Andrei, you part of your job as the First Secretary for Economic Affairs is convincing that there is a role and a place for Czech companies to be involved in this reconstruction and rebuilding and investment, because you will need a lot of money.
Yes.
But what do they say? When you say, come to rebuild Dnipro or Kyiv, Lviv, or wherever it is, surely they are saying, yes, we're interested, but we need the bombs to stop falling and the missiles to stop falling until we can begin to spend money on that.
If we talk about the government level, you surely know that the Czech Republic has took the patronage of Dnipro city, and also made this plan of recovery plan of Ukraine from 23 to 25 years. So it's a big message for business, for Czech business, to be involved in this process. And also in a Ministry of Trade and Industry, yes, of Czech Republic, they created this business club Ukraine, which gathered together enterprises which are interested in rebuilding process and making business in Ukraine. And we already sent one mission, a business mission was in Lviv, I think last month, and it was quite successful. There were signed some agreements and some business relations were established.
But all of this just exists on paper for now, doesn't it? I mean, there are no Czech companies at work already in Ukraine, or is it all something that will happen after the war, after this is finished, after this is over?
There is a problem with insurance of investments,
of course,
because of war, and there are some Czech enterprises, big enterprises, which want to came to Ukraine and establish their facilities, their production, but it's this process is in process. So we'll see how fast they could establish something in Ukraine. But there are still ongoing businesses, Czech businesses in Ukraine, and also.
And they're still operating there?
Yes, yes. And also there are some Czech enterprises that had projects before the full-scale invasion, and they are still going on those projects and still building, and it's great, I think.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we've got definitely got time for some questions. So glad I brought my glasses. This one from Anonymous. What kind of security guarantees can or will the EU provide Ukraine and the Central Eastern Europe region in order to counter any further Russian aggression? That's a very good question. So looking really far into the future, if you do push back the Russians from your borders, What about the future? What guarantees does your country need to secure its future?
I think, first of all, we need to be the part of the NATO. It will be the great thing for security measures, and
even with so much potential resistance from some countries which simply don't fancy a fight with Russia. You know, I mean, you hear what Macron or others say about Ukraine's NATO ambitions. It just does not seem likely to an impassionate observer looking at it that it's going to happen. I mean, you're younger than me, but I mean, even in your lifetime, it seems unlikely.
Oh, we will see. You know, the opinion might change during the war, while we will win and they occupied more and more territories. I think they will change their mind.
What if they come up with a kind of NATO light, a half NATO? They can say, well, we could perhaps give you these guarantees and these guarantees. You won't be a full member, but do you think your country could be satisfied with that?
I would still like to believe that we would be the part of NATO as fully agent.
Yes, no, given the war in Ukraine, how close are we to the establishment of a comprehensive EPC? I think that's a European Political Community, I think using the acronym for that, yeah. The European Political Community, it's an initiative that was supported by France earlier this year at a summit in Prague, which is a very large community of European countries, but not just EU countries, also Turkey, Ukraine, the Western Balkans, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and so on. Do you think the war has made the creation of a body like that, so a body that's bigger than the EU, but smaller than, you know, the United Nations, has it made it more likely, less likely?
It might. It could be. It could be. Well, because of the changes we are facing, the alliance as we talk, this could be very useful, and it might live this.
And looking again to the future, we were talking a few minutes ago before we sat down here about the future reconstruction of Ukraine.
Yes.
Obviously, it's a mammoth task. I think you mentioned some astronomical figure in euros or dollars of how much damage has been done by Russia and how much you're going to need to rebuild it. But I mean,
it's about $340 billion now damage is done. Something about that. Maybe it's now even more.
That's a huge amount of money.
Yes, but Ukraine has a big potential. It has resources. It has good educated nation. So I think that after the war, or even during, the more and more business and other countries will see more opportunities in Ukraine, and we will get a lot of investments. And also, I think that Russia has to pay for this also.
But as we were discussing before, if you take the example of a city like Mariupol,
yes,
a huge, vibrant, multicultural, founded by the Greeks, I think, centuries ago, city, this incredible city.
Yes.
That's just a shell now, isn't it? It's a cemetery.
Yes.
How do you rebuild that? What will Mariupol look like in 2050?
You know, if we look, if we look at Dubai, it was built very quickly, and as you can see, it's very beautiful city. So I think we will rebuild our Mariupol, and the best way with all the modern stuff we could bring there.
And finally, because I think we're running close to our limits, but how long is this going to take? Are we talking 10 years, 20 years, 100 years? How long will all this take for Ukraine to be a normal, functioning market economy and liberal democracy after the war has finished?
The first things we all need as a big European family, and Ukraine is a part of it, we need to win this war. We need to win it, and after this, I think that the recovery will be really fast. I truly believe that we will rebuild, and for example, I think everybody see this attack on Kiev, when they attacked the center of Kiev, and the road that was damaged, and it was like replaced in one day. So that's how I see what will be done in the future with our country.
Right. Okay. Well, with the sound of the bells ringing 12 o'clock, drifting over the river Vltava from Prague, I think that's a good point at which to end. So I'd like to thank very much again Andrei Kolesnitchenko, who is the First Secretary for Economic Affairs at the Embassy of Ukraine. Thank you, Andrei.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for this dialogue and inspiring remarks when it comes to restoration of Ukraine. Now it's time to have a lunch break. Let me remind you that the next panel discussion begins at 12:40, so please let's stick into this tight schedule. At 12:40, one discussion is taking place here. It's the main discussion, and we will welcome here former Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic, Tomáš Petříček, and participants of the Future European Leaders Forum. And in the room downstairs in the Brown Hall, we have the roundtable discussion on Euroscepticism. And let me remind you that this discussion about Euroscepticism is only for those who registered in advance, so for those who received the invitation and registered. All the others will meet here in this room to discuss with future European leaders. So thank you very much and enjoy your lunch.